has taught me a lot.
Sorry.
Oh, take it away, Dina.
Okay, here we go. So, welcome everybody to Home Funerals, the where, how, and why of caring for our own. I want to start with a heartfelt thank you to the members and neighbors and volunteers of Amherst Neighbors and Village Neighbors. For Amherst Neighbors folks who don't know, Village Neighbors is a Shutesbury, Leverett, Wendell, and New Salem um, collaboration, neighbors collaboration, and the Northeast Death Care Collaborative for making this space possible for us, and Sue for her able facilitation. And I want to thank also Carol Cohen, my collaborating funeral information and anthropologist friend who's joining us. She's also the former president of the Western Massachusetts Funeral Consumers Alliance, and the first person I met who is as curious about matters of life and death as I am, and equally committed to making sure people have access to accurate and up to date information about dying in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. My name is Dina Stander. I'm a local end of life navigator, founder of the Northeast Death Care Collaborative, a board member of the Hospice of the Fisher Home, and author and burial shroud maker. And my contact information is at the top of the chat, and I'll post it again at the end of our presentation. But if you're looking for me online, it's www.dinastander.com, just my name to keep it simple. So, what is a home funeral? Home funerals invite family, friends, and community into a healing after death collaboration in a safe and familiar place, with body care performed by loving hands. A home funeral has a number of specific elements, including time to bathe and dress the body, hosting a home vigil and other after death ceremonies, and transporting the body for burial or cremation. Things you should carefully plan and consider include cooling supplies, what you will need for filing death certificates and other documents, and whether you will hire professionals for specific services, such as a celebrant or a funeral director. The time when people were laid out for a vigil and wake in the front parlor and prepared for burial and given a memorial service and transported for disposition, all from the home, is beyond the memory of most of us in America. A home funeral is not something newly invented, though, and it's a practice that people are returning to, weaving old wisdom and customs with updated materials and resources. The bottom line is that we have lots of choices when it comes to caring for our loved ones after death. And today's presentation is a chance to gather information about caring for our own at home, to ask questions, and to encourage lively community as we wade into the waters of life and death. So here's a little background to consider. We'll be using the term home vigil. That's when a body stays or is brought back home after death for visits from family, friends, and community for 1 to 3 days, typically. Family members have the opportunity and the time to plan a fitting goodbye, and if needed, clergy or a celebrant can come to the home. Embalming is not required by law in any state in the United States. Techni ice, which is readily available and preferred these days to dry ice, is because it's safer to handle. So, Techni ice, air conditioning, and in winter, simply open windows can all keep the body sufficiently cooled. We can answer questions today about regulations for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. If you need to transport a body across state lines, you will need to make legal arrangements. Only 9 states compel a family to hire a funeral director for filing, transportation, or disposition witness, and Massachusetts is not one of these states, but we need to be aware that bordering states, New York and Connecticut, do have these restrictions. So I brought a slideshow that we can dive into, and I will set it up now and share my screen. And I'm going to talk for a bit, and Carol will promises to interrupt me if she needs to. and and is here for corrections and that sort of thing and input. Is that bar right? Do you guys see that? No, it went away. Okay. The reemergence of home funerals in America. Whoops. Oh, is that worked before? I should just be able to. It's. Huh. I'm going to stop my share. Hold on. If I can. Oh, there it went. Okay. So, why home funerals? I'm sorry for being clumsy. It is our legal right and privilege when someone dies to take care of them. We aren't required. So I'm going to back up just a little bit. When a person dies at home, and we've talked about this in our last conversation some, the thing to do is nothing. The first thing to do is nothing. The first thing to do is to sit and breathe and be together with the people that you're with. And we are not compelled to dial 911 because, especially if a death is expected, it's not an emergency situation. Family led and family directed care is one of our options. And a lot of us don't know that we don't have to, we're not required to call a funeral director right away. We may want to for certain services, but we're not required to, and we can take care of our loved ones on our own. And it's not all that complicated in most situations, and we can support each other in having these skills and in making the time. And the one of the considerations for a home funeral is just the carbon footprint. It's ecologically conscious. Um, there's less waste. There's less transporting. There's less back and forth for everybody. It's often considerably less expensive, and it's a good way to save some money. And it offers an opportunity for, I think, unusually meaningful connection. So this was, I was able to make it go before. I'm really going to have a hard time with this. Okay. Oh, this is, I'm having one of those moments you don't want to have while you're in the middle of a presentation that is exceptionally stressful because I can't figure out how to stop sharing. Can you stop my screen share, Sue? Oh, that went to the next slide. I don't understand. I'm just gonna. I'm really sorry about this. Let's see if I can get there. What I'm trying to do is move out of the screen sharing. Okay, and stop share. That should have worked. Okay, so because I can't make the slides go, I'm gonna talk and sort of do them one at a time, I think. Unless, does anyone have a suggestion to me for how to fix this?
Dina,
Yeah.
I made you the host, and that might
Oh,
fix it
oh,
because
okay.
when you left and came back, you became the co-host. So
Okay.
it might be
I'm
worth
gonna
another
try
try.
this again then. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Okay, we're going to go back up to here and I'll press play. You guys all see that now? And I think I'm still going to have a hard time switching slides. It's sort of going automatically. So I'm going to I think what I'm going to do is I still can't. Wow, something is like wrong with my computer. Oh, maybe that's it. No, now it's working. Okay. I will stop fussing and just continue. Thank you, everybody. I'm sorry for the people watching the recording with how confusing this has been. So, a brief history. Way back when, home funerals were what people did. When someone died, they were laid out in the front parlor and um, transported from the home, possibly to a house of worship, and then for burial. And during the Civil War, embalming became the norm. The enormity of death at that time created a business for embalming because it was a way for bodies to be transported home after death. After that, and coming into the 20th century, more people started to die in hospitals instead of at home. And so there became an industry of transporting people, um, and a profession that developed around that, of funeral directors, not just sort of local undertakers, but a whole industry of elaborate out of the house care. And families lost the knowledge of how to care for their own at death, and it became very unusual. And the funeral industry is a $20 billion a year thing in the United States. Not so much in other countries, but here it's significant. But what does it mean to have a home funeral? What's involved? So, home funerals may include bathing and laying out, a home vigil, which means people coming and gathering at the home and um, sharing food or song or meditation and prayer. There might be a home funeral ceremony, which wouldn't necessarily be different from any other kind of funeral ceremony. You could have your clergy person come and conduct funeral rites and rituals at home. There are necessary forms, and and Carol, do you want to talk about the paperwork a bit? What are those necessary forms?
Uh, yeah, the basic thing is a death certificate. And the other basic thing is a burial permit, also known as a transit permit or a disposition, removal, and transportation permit. But that's the document that permits somebody to move a body from one place to another, including a crematory or a cemetery or burial ground.
And you
So,
can
and it's still generally referred to as paperwork, even though it's electronic now.
I was going to say you can find the transportation forms online. And the thing that's really
It's
important,
so it's not a separate, it's all part of the same process. You can't get a transportation form. You can't just
you have to have the death certificate.
fill one out. It's the culminating document that's produced by the electronic death registration system.
Okay.
So ordinarily, in most cases, people are hiring a funeral home to do this stuff, and the funeral director does all of that. When you're doing a home funeral, it's the people who are overseeing the home funeral who do that. So those folks are operating in the stead of a funeral director. And what you would do for the death certificate is complete the basic information worksheet and take it to the town clerk in the town where the death occurred. And that person may require a bit of education, but that's the person who would initiate the record for a newly deceased person.
And then arranging disposition is about burial or cremation, essentially, or other options that might be available that we talked about last time. The law supports families in these ways. Home vigils are legal in every state. So wherever you are in the United States, if you want to gather with community at home, you are able to do that. And it's legal and it's okay and it's safe. Embalming is not required by law in any state. There are 9 states that compel us to hire a professional for non-vigil requirements. So 9 states that require you to hire a funeral home for transportation and 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 other body care. Is there anything besides transportation directly that fits into that category, Carol?
I haven't read up on that recently. I did compile a list of them a while back. For some of them, it is only to do the death certificate.
Right. Okay.
And for some of them, it's transportation and other particular things that they need to be there at the time of the burial.
But here in Massachusetts, you can hire a funeral director to help with these things, such as the death certificate and transportation, or you can file your own paperwork and do it on your own. And that is an option here. Home funerals are often more affordable. There are people who can share the tasks. You're not purchasing a lot of extra things. You're using what's available on hand. Because you're doing your own legwork, you're not charged to file the you're not charged for filing the paperwork, so there's no cost to you for that kind of thing. You're not having someone make final arrangements for you. You're making your arrangements. You're transporting potentially with a family vehicle, and you're hiring out for what you can't do or what you're uncomfortable doing. And I think this is an important thing. There is help. There are professionals and home funeral guides and other people who can, like myself, who can help you understand what you need to do to prepare for a home funeral. And so that if there are tasks that you're uncomfortable doing, there's help for that. And you're not required to. And so you have this option of having clearer. I got so discombobulated, didn't I? I'm sorry. So you have the option of hiring for the things you're not comfortable doing, but really what this is about is the kinds of conversations that you have with your family and around planning, around what you're comfortable with, what you're not comfortable with, and we'll get more into that. Home funerals are really very eco-friendly. You're using available materials. You're not embalming, so there aren't invasive practices. You're using non-toxic materials for cooling. Often you might be using locally made and sourced caskets, shrouds, or urns, and looking at other kinds of eco-friendly burial practices. Planning for a home funeral is one of the most important pieces, and this part about the conversations that you have with different people. Your advance directives, making sure your paperwork's in order so that when you die, the people who are caring for your body know what you want, and you've talked it through with them and made agreements with them. I think this part is very important because, especially with a home funeral, you can't just leave a note that says, please, I want a home funeral. Don't send me to the funeral home. Don't do any of those things. You need people to be willing to care for you. And people need to be prepared for what body care means, and the kind of time with family and community that you're hoping to create around your death. You want to have these conversations with your family. You want to leave written plans so that people aren't saying, what did she want us to do? Where did she want us to put her? Did she prefer daisies or carnations? All of these things are, did she want us to sing that hymn for her? These are important things to talk about and to leave written down someplace. A designated agent, and I've had an experience within the last few weeks with a family where the person who died was not married to the person he had lived with for 25 years, and he died, and they did not do the paperwork for her to be his designated agent, and she found she was not able to make any decision about what happened to his body when he died. And his sibling, who he had seen once in the last 20 years, was the next of kin, and it was complicated. So this thing about a designated agent, if you're the sort of hierarchy of next of kin is spouse, I think parent, sibling, and children. Is that the list, or are children higher up on the list? You're muted, Carol.
I think that's right.
Okay,
It's
so
it's
that's the list. Spouse first, a parent if there's a living parent, siblings of the person who's deceased, and then their children. And so she was really out of the loop, and it was very distressing, and they were able to work it all out, but it caused extra turmoil at a time that was already really difficult, and that can really be avoided by um, filling out a very simple piece of paper that designates that names someone as your designated agent for making decisions about what happens to your body after you die. The other people you want to talk to in your life about these kinds of things are your doctor, your clergy, your attorney, if you're working with attorney for advance directives and other end of life planning. And if you have in mind the people who you think are going to help and show up and roll up their sleeves in your house when you're gone, you need to talk to them about it. You need to say, will you be one of the people who comes? And it's a tender conversation, and it's a really important conversation, and planning who's going to help. I mean, this picture sort of says it all. Um, it's good to know how you're going to get the coffin down the stairs. So, what's a home funeral guide? A home funeral guide is a person like myself who educates about choices, who informs about laws and policies, who might demonstrate techniques. I have come and practiced with a family before a death about how to move a body in the bed, to change clothes and dress someone or wash someone, and a home funeral guide might just be there to support the family that's in charge, to help them be prepared, to bring things like Techni-Ice. Techni-Ice is you'll hear us talk about it a bit. It's a food grade self chilling product. You dunk it in water and squish it up, and these little cells swell That's what I've done with it.
It isn't self-chilling. You do have to stick you hydrate it
You hydrate
and
it and then you put it out. Well, yeah, it
put it
was winter. We could
in
put
the
it outside
freezer.
the
You put it
lesson,
in the
right?
freezer and
And it
then,
chills, and you can use that to keep the body cold without dry ice.
yes.
Um, and so I've delivered Techni Ice to people so that they have it on hand. A home funeral guide can help with that sort of thing, helping with supplies. Um, a home funeral guide should respect the choices of the family first and honor diverse traditions and partner with the caregivers to support their learning, and always puts the wishes of the family first. It's what I think of as my role as a home funeral educator is to support families in having the skills and the materials they need to conduct family-led care on their own. I don't I don't believe you should need me. If you do, I'm happy to show up, but the point is to make sure that people feel confident um, in conducting care for their own families at end of life. And that is really the thing that we are wanting to do. I'm sure you have questions. I'm sorry that was a little discombobulated because of the screw up with my computer and the slideshow. You know, so
I'll,
go ahead.
oh, I'll just add a comment on that second to last slide there about the role of a home funeral guide, which is emphasizing the guide part and the education part. Sometimes people want to bring in a person who kind of functions as an alternative funeral director, and that should not ever be the job of the home funeral guide, because it's illegal for somebody to do that for money without a funeral director's license.
That is
And
the
the
part.
point
Yes.
of doing it is for the family to do it and to care for their loved one and to thereby experience the up close intimacy of that person's death and the grief and the fact of it and the caring for that person that that person cannot do anymore, and that whole package of stuff that you give away to the funeral directors and they sell back to you um,
That.
when you're doing a conventional thing. So
Right. That was very articulate. Thank you. So we've got a couple questions. One is, do you place the Techni Ice on the body? I wrap it in dish towels first, but yes. So, um, to be sort of specific, um, imagining that my imaginary friend, what should I call my imaginary friend today? Stuart, has died in my home, and it was an expected death, and we had hospice care, and so there's someone to sign the death certificate, and but I'm going to take that. I've decided that, and Stuart has asked me to have a home funeral. So here's Stuart, and Stuart needs to be prepared and laid out. And there are a number of friends who have agreed to do this together. And we'll gather in the room and we'll have um, bowls of water that might be scented with some rosemary oil, and we'll have some, or lavender or something, and we'll have some washcloths, and we might um, turn on a soundtrack that Stuart prepared for us, um, that that he wanted us to hear together during this time. And so, we'll have Stuart's tunes playing, and um, we'll wash the sweat of dying from him very gently. It doesn't make a mess. It's just care and touch. And we'll tell stories together while we do this kind, lovely, intimate thing. And we'll we'll notice that scar that Stuart got that time that we remember out in the woods we were all together, or whatever your story is with this person. And we'll dress Stuart. There might be things that we do with Stuart with his body. I'm sorry about my dog. Excuse me. You have to go. She wasn't going to stop. There might be things we needed to do with Stuart's body while we're cleaning him to deal with bodily fluids. It's not an emergency. And if you do a little bit of reading about this, you'll find that there are easy ways to help someone be clean. I want you to know that um, a, a body, a person's body, when after they've died, is not contagious. It does not immediately start spawning spore of death that we are going to catch. Death itself is not catchy. A dead body is not dangerous. There are certain conditions in which, very few, in which a person who's died, you might have to take special precautions, but that's that's the outlying case rather than the norm. Um, and there is something in my experience about this intimacy that is not as scary in practice as it seems when we're talking about it ahead of time. So, if there are questions you have about that, um, go ahead and ask them anytime. Um, yeah. So, you place the Techni ice on the body, and it's really just the torso that needs to be kept cool, pretty much.
Torso and lower abdomen especially.
Right.
Yeah, torso including uh, particularly the left lower quadrant.
Right. And so front and back.
Pardon me, right lower quadrant. But yes,
Uh-huh.
front and back underneath. So you can cut the Techni ice so it's about the size of a sheet of paper, 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and it's frozen, but it's in cells that have been hydrated, and so it's somewhat flexible. I like to put them in pillowcases so that it doesn't fall out, but 2 or 3 under the back, 2 or 3 on the top of the torso, 1 or 2 under the head and neck, 1 possibly on the top of the head, but you want to cool the brain down as well.
Right.
And then change them, check from time to time, see how cold they still are and how warm the body still is. You can slip your hand underneath the person to see whether there's still any heat being generated. And if so, then swap them out. So you need 2 sets of these things that are frozen, and take the slightly warmed ones out, put them in the freezer, and put the cold ones in, and continue. That was one comment I had actually from earlier, that you can just use the Techni ice for cooling as long as you have made sure to do the initial cooling down to start with. Very important.
So there's a question about, to get a death certificate, is it necessary to have an MD sign off? Yes.
Yes.
And in some cases, the medical examiner, correct?
If there is any question about the reason for the death, in any case of death, well, yeah, in any case of death, the death has to be pronounced. And the easiest kind of situation for a home funeral actually is an expected death at home under hospice care, because it's known, expected that this person is going to die. There's a hospice nurse who can pronounce death. There's a physician who's connected to that service. And all of that is expected. It is not a surprise. Whereas if somebody dies at home and you don't know why, absolutely you need to call 911. And the ME, the medical examiner, needs to have the opportunity to weigh in on whether or not, yeah, we think this is okay.
Right.
We have some questions about this. And in that case, the medical examiner might, if they take the person away to the morgue, to the ME's morgue, in that case, the medical examiner would do the death certificate.
Right. And so, and the body can be returned home, correct? After leaving the morgue, if you still want to do a home funeral?
You would need to make it clear that you wanted to do that and make arrangements ahead of time, because sometimes people in charge of dead bodies are not easy about releasing the body to the family, even though it is perfectly legal. Then there's the question of the jurisdiction liability, etc. So if they die in hospital, it's the same kind of thing. You want to talk to people ahead of time and make sure they know that you want to do this, and are they going to be okay with that, or do you need to talk to somebody else? But it's legal, yes, to do that.
I hope that the ambiguities of this conversation give you some sense of why it's important to plan and to have some things lined up. There are some situations where if someone dies, um, I'll use my very living husband as an example. If he died of a heart attack out in the world somewhere, he would be taken to a hospital. Um, if it was obvious that he died of a heart attack, and an autopsy was not required, I would ask for him to be transported home so that I could um, continue with the home funeral that both of us would want for him to have. Um, that is one example. I might have to wrangle with the hospital to release them to me, and I might have to jump through hoops, and I might really hate it, but it would be possible. Um, if again, as Carol said, if he died at home with hospice care and the hospice doctor signed off on the death certificate, that would be the most straightforward and simple thing. Oh, there's a good question. How fast does rigor mortis come on, and how do you deal with it? So, rigor mortis starts within, I'm blanking on the number of hours.
2 or 3 or 4 hours,
2 to 4 hours, and it lasts for about 12 ish. I mean, these are ish. So
yep.
the body is very stiff. So if you can do your washing and changing and positioning before that happens, it will go easier for you. So that 2-ish hour window is kind of important for that part. Um, and then the body will be very difficult to move for a certain period of time, and then it will loosen up a bit. Does that answer that question? Is that helpful, Larry? More questions? You know, there's uh, it's really hard in this kind of presentation without a little video to um which I don't have, but to show you how lovely this can be. So I want to describe for you um a home funeral that I witnessed from about half an hour after death, um, and how this community made that work. I had been part of the conversations with the family before the death, um, so that everybody was comfortable with the roles that they were choosing from what was available, and um, had some basic understanding of what to expect and what it would feel like and what it would look like, and we sort of walked through those things together. But then there we were. You know, they called me up, and their loved one had died, and I came, and they were already they were already starting. Um, because we had talked about what to do first, which was to make these bowls of water, and to make them smell good, and to have washcloths, and that the water could be warm, not so much for the for the person who was gone, but for them, and for their experience of touching.
Mhm.
And they were already washing his face and his body, and they had lit candles and turned the lights a little low, and they were starting to hum and just sing for him. And it was so gentle this time, so unusually gentle. And then they gathered things to place on the bed with him, special things and special cloths, and they made it beautiful. And there was soup in the other room, so there were things to eat, soup and bread. And people from the neighborhood started to come by because they were told that he had passed. And as word spread, people came to the house to pay respects and to visit with one another and to have a little soup. And um, by ones or twos or threes, they would go into the room and have a moment with his body. And it was just very slow and respectful and sacred, without the imposition of sacredness, if you know what I mean. It was sacred from inside, this experience. And he was there for about 24 hours, and the family decided to have a funeral home come. It was winter, and they chose cremation, and the funeral home came to transport the body. And when they came, you know, it was unusual for the funeral home to come and see someone, because they had also shrouded him before he was taken from the house. um, it was unusual for them to come and find someone so carefully prepared for them. And they carried him out um, very with great honor. This is what his family said, that the the funeral attendants carried him out with great honor,
Mhm.
and he was transported. And they felt like in that 24 hours that they had taken to prepare him for his next journey, um, that they had also come along the way themselves in their grief, in a way that was meaningful and significantly engaging for them. You know, it wasn't, they didn't feel separated. They felt they had walked with him and helped him on his journey. And um, it was really, it taught me so much about what we can give to the people we love. And I felt so happy to have help them have the conversations that they needed to have together so that um, their family could do this. And in the end, without much help, they knew how. That's what they found. They could start.
I have a question. It's Larry, and Carol sort of alluded that this what you're describing, which is pretty, intense in certain ways and beautiful in other ways and emotional and everything related, feels like it works best when you know you're dying under hospice umbrella, and because the family likely who's out of town. Because I'm thinking how quickly you described the scenario. In 30 minutes, they were doing this, that, and the other. And I'm thinking about people who would be close family who are not nearby. So there's so many scenarios that would be more challenging, I guess, whether it's the bureaucracy you alluded to, because now you're not at home, maybe the death wasn't clear that it was going to happen, or there's a lot of scenarios that would be tougher to make this work, I guess, is what it sounds like, if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly.
Which is why I tried to sort of describe something,
Yeah.
using my own husband as an example of there would be hoops to jump through. Yes.
Yeah.
You have to be kind of determined. This is why planning ahead is important.
Well, that's a great point, that, the advanced directive issue of having paperwork so you could go to the hospital administration or funeral home director or whoever it is that's gatekeeping and say, this was planned. I mean, to have it in black and white sounds like you would almost need that to get to have a chance at being successful.
It helps.
Yeah.
It helps. It also might be ignored.
Yeah, I could see that.
It sort of depends sometimes on the personality of the administrators you're running up against too.
Yeah.
I hate to say that, but it does.
Mm-hmm.
And Dina, it also requires within that hierarchy of decision makers that you have a capable spouse or a capable parent or a capable sibling or a capable offspring.
Or the paperwork for a designated agent. Yes.
Right. Because sometimes, well, many families don't have that. And
right.
So working with somebody in order to designate the agent so that those people who are also grieving are off the hook for the legwork and the advocacy could be just so valuable.
Yes. This is why, if what you really want for yourself is a home funeral, it absolutely makes sense to have a team of folks in your life who are willing and able, who are up for doing a little bit of research, and who say yes when you ask them, will you be my designated agent? Are you willing to jump through these hoops for me when I die? Anne.
I wanted to know about green burial, and in terms of where I'm turning away from the idea of cremation. And I know somebody who had, I think this was a while ago, but they were buried in a wicker casket. And I can't remember where they were buried, but what are the options for where you could decide if you're not necessarily wanting a funeral plot, or, where people are visiting, or what are the options?
Well, for green burial, you will have to have a funeral plot.
Okay. And it has to be at a cemetery.
It has to be for green burial of a body. It has to be a body needs to be buried in a designated burial ground. And if you want to make that on your own property, you need to talk to your Board of Health, well in advance, like more than a year in advance. It is not a last minute thing to get these designations worked out on your own property. Um, Otherwise, you would need to purchase a plot in a municipal or private cemetery. And some cemeteries, like there are some local municipal cemeteries that have become hybrid, where they allow green burial and also have conventional burial. It's important in New England to realize that there's a difference between conventional and traditional burial. Traditional burials, from my perspective, have always been green. And then we got conventional and added embalming and steel caskets with, you know, rubber gaskets and embalming and vaults. And we are going to now sort of move back towards we're calling it green, but it's for me, it's a return to traditional burial. Um, and there are Wildwood Cemetery is a place where you can have, they have a designated natural burial area. There are a few other local, you really need to call around and talk to folks, but I think it's changing and going to continue to change. I'm going next week to the New England Cemetery Managers Association meeting, and I'll be able to tell you more about what the trends are after I hear there.
I could
Yeah.
add a couple of things on green burial. There's an organization I helped start called Green Burial Massachusetts that has a database that is not complete, but it is intending to be a database of all of the cemeteries in Massachusetts and which ones permit green burials and various other practices.
It's fairly comprehensive. It certainly gives you a sense of it.
If
Okay.
you're in Western Massachusetts, there are specific towns that are permitting green burial. The basic thing is whether they will permit you to not use a burial vault or grave liner, because the other things you can do on your own anyway. You don't have to embalm the body. You can use a plain pine box.
Etc.
Yeah.
I
So
did, oh, there was an article that my husband showed me not too long ago about somebody who is got this grant and for composting
yeah.
Yes. So
a body, which I think is fantastic.
we had an extensive conversation about this a month ago, and I will make sure you can. Sue, can you send Anne the recording from our last conversation, which was about body disposition options with composting? There's composting right now isn't or natural organic reduction. Which is the formal term for human composting, is not legal right now in Massachusetts. In the United States, it's legal in the state of Washington and in the state of Colorado. There is legislation in Massachusetts to bring natural organic reduction and alkaline hydrolysis, which is a water-based, not cremation because it's not using fire, but similar result, to Massachusetts, so that we have more body disposition options here. But the we talked about that really at length last time. I think you'd get more from the recording then.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So if I might, I wanted to just go back briefly to the discussion about designated agents.
Yeah.
There are states that have so-called designated agent laws. We don't have those in Massachusetts. There isn't a specific form that you fill out in Massachusetts, but Massachusetts also does not forbid it. And there is something in the CMR, the Code of Massachusetts Regulations for Funeral Directors, that if somebody has written something, if there are written instructions, they are supposed to follow those. So I don't recall how specific that is, but so if you wish to designate an agent, it would be important to write that down in as much detail as would make it useful.
Right.
And possibly have it witnessed and or notarized. So it's clear that you are the one who said that, and that's what you want. And somebody knows where that instruction is to take it to whoever, so that they say, oh, this person, in fact, wanted the non-married spouse to do this.
Good.
But
Thank
don't
you.
go looking for a designated agent form in Massachusetts, because
Right.
it'll take you
We'll
a
find
long
it-
time
we'll
to figure
find
out
it
there
other,
isn't one.
other places, not here.
Yeah.
So Larry asks, how do you suggest having initial conversations with family and friends that you want to involve but have never done anything, but who have never done anything like this? I personally, I'd start with a potluck. Um, a dinner conversation is sharing food and talking about death go really well together for some reason. It makes it easier. It's something about being able to say pass the salt. I'm not sure what it is, but it's definitely helpful. So
They can't run out of the room screaming because their plate of food is right there.
there we go. So you might prepare them. You might say, I need to have an unusual conversation with you about what I want to happen after I die with my body. Will you come for dinner? And bring together a few key people and walk them through it. You know, I would do a little more research than we've had time to talk about here, so that you're prepared to answer some of their nitty gritty questions. What will your skin feel like when you're dead? Will I want to touch you? I mean, there are some very intimate questions. You might want to say, I only want my spouse or my sibling to wash my body. I don't want my children to do it. You know, you should think through some of these things that are, like I said at the beginning, very close to the bone. And if you can, um, because the conversation leans into some pretty heavy areas, bring some levity to it too, you know? Um, Make sure they don't use bubblegum essential oil if you don't want to go off to the great beyond smelling like bubblegum. Or maybe you do. Um, but take the time to let people know what you would like. And let well, so about these conversations, let people say no. Be prepared.
Mhm.
Be prepared for people to say that's way too intense for me to even think about.
Mhm.
um I have sat with people who, and if you can, if you have the luxury of time, start that conversation a year or two before you need it. Because someone who says that would be way too intense for me to even think about, let alone do, um, when they might say that a year from your death, but having spent more time with you as you came closer to death, they might have changed their mind. That having this thought that you've asked them to be intimate with them and with you in this way ahead of time, gives them the time to change their minds, or change their mind in the other direction. So you have to have more than one person who's going to help, um, and you have to have space for people to say no, and be prepared for that. You know, or for people to say, I can do this part but not that part.
And
Another,
they're part of a team. They're, no one's taking all of it on themselves, other than the agent would have the leadership role.
Right.
I think it's a lot for anyone to try to think about doing solo.
Yeah, this is not an all on your own kind of thing. On the other hand, um, another family I worked with, when the time came, the spouse was alone, and
Mhm.
it would be another day before anyone else could come. They had hospice care, so hospice came and did the paperwork things, but they knew they wanted to to keep the loved one home for 24 hours, 40, I think it was almost 2 days that they kept them home. And they were alone for that time of preparation and hadn't planned to be. People came later. So so there are things to think about and imagine. Laura,
What kind of families do it, and how common is it now?
I can talk about all kinds of families.
Yeah.
I mean, there are traditional communities that always lay people out at home all over the country, um, and and who have these skills, as part of their faith tradition or something else. Um, but it's not common. Do you have a sense of how many, Laura? I mean, Carol. Sorry.
How many families do this sort of thing? I don't, like, what percentage?
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, tiny.
but I did want to offer a couple of other possibilities for if your family lives somewhere else. One is that sometimes people just have a group of friends and they say, whichever of us goes first, this is what we're going to do.
Mhm.
And because you don't know who's going to go first, you don't know if you have 2 years still. Um, but but if all of the people in that group want to do that, want to be on a team, and uh, hopefully you would add a person here or there so that it wouldn't dwindle, and at the end there's one person left who did all of
All
them.
alone.
Um, but to have a group of like-minded people who then can learn these skills and encourage each other and so on and work together as a team. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is that sometimes faith communities, congregations decide that they want to have a committee that is in charge of doing this stuff, and they have the Techni ice on hand, and it may be in the freezer in the basement or something. It's just there for when it's needed, rather than somebody all of a sudden having to order it on Amazon and try to hurry up the rehydration process. That's their task in the. I mean, it doesn't even have to be a religious faith congregation. It can be a spiritual group, but it's a um, somewhat more organized way of having a team.
So care circles, community care
Yeah.
circles
Yeah.
that we pull together, wherever we are. I thought that that's an interesting question for villages, since this is
The village.
the
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
for the
Neighbors.
neighbors group. So Amherst neighbors, village neighbors, the other neighbors groups. Within these um, groups that are intentionally created to help people age well at home and
And
to
it is,
create community care, as we age together.
yes.
Um, Care circles for end of life care are a really viable resource.
And it's
And
entirely possible that more people would do it if it were easier to do it, or easier to accomplish it, and they knew about it. Because once people have been through this kind of thing, I have run into it a number of times where somebody in the family or thought, that is really gross. I don't want a dead body in my house. I don't want to have anything to do with this. Fine, the sibling does it, and they sit with dad and they come and talk to dad, and they're really moved by it. And then they are really appreciative. I'm so glad you did it this way. I wouldn't want to do it any other way. but it was the process of doing it that got them to that place. If you just give them that, oh, this is what I want, it's having been through it. So if the neighbors groups start doing this more, then I think the numbers would increase if people are, if the situation permits it.
I'm curious, Dina, are you aware of any of the local co-housing communities, if they have done uh, home funerals in their shared spaces or in people's individual spaces?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Carol, do you know? I haven't heard of it, but I wouldn't be
No,
surprised by it.
yeah.
It seems like an ideal setting.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I've done celebrations of life at co-housing, but not with a body. So, that's an interesting consideration. I think there are all sorts of ways that alternative death care are going to come into our sphere of consciousness over the next few years. It's been growing awareness for quite some time, and it's really exciting to see, for me, how interested people are. But I think Larry's question about how do you begin these conversations is so important. Do you want to have it with friends? Do you want to have it with family? Do you want to have both? Do you want to combine that? You know, um, and Carol's point that to have care circles that evolve so that there can be new members as there's as people age out, so to speak, um, is a really important thing too.
Can I say something? Oops.
Please.
I find this all really fascinating. I'm a hospice nurse, and I've been a hospice nurse for a long time. And I don't think I can think of anybody who I've met who's had this, which seems really crazy.
Interesting.
But I really liked the line that you used, sacred without the imposition of being sacred. And part of it is, how can we do this so that it doesn't seem intimidating? And I just think for a lot of people, this would seem totally intimidating. And on a much smaller scale, I did watch your video on using a shroud.
Uh-huh.
And I was so struck watching it, how simple it was, but that how it would give so much meaning to family members who might otherwise think, how am I going to do anything to make this moment after my person has died meaningful? And the whole shrouding is it's so simple. And in a way, even if you don't go in for, an entire whole funeral, how can you make this after death period meaningful so that somebody's not just picked up and put in a bag and taken out the door?
That.
Is really powerful. And I just feel like, as a hospice nurse, I want to spend more time talking to people about, what do you want after you die? Because we're all focused on, and as a nurse especially, focused on getting to that point.
Right.
In the best, and so we're very focused on the life.
And after last breath. So a lot of my work is focused before that. And
Yeah.
then there's this whole portion of my work that's really focused after last breath,
Yeah.
and empowering people and encouraging people to not shut the door on that time. I
Yeah.
think that I had this experience when I was interning as a hospital chaplain where um, I was asked in the emergency room to a very busy ER to rush a family out after a death.
Mhm.
Right? Would you please help them leave? Right? And it was really confusing for me because all I wanted to do was help them stay. And and I was like, "Oh, this is really wrong. This is wrong for the people. It's hurtful to them. It was harmful."
Yeah.
Right? And I knew that there was trauma that was going to come from this later, and I tried to sort of put in words that would ameliorate some of that. And it's really it's we're so in a rush for what the next step is, and that the thing that I teach that I think's most important is what to do when someone's died, and the word is nothing.
Mhm. Yeah, I like that.
First, nothing. Just be with it. Be with it. Feel your own heart beating in your chest, because that is your life and it's precious. And you have shared it with this person who's now gone. There's so much good in that moment, in that, even if it's 10 minutes. But so, this thing about, you bring up an interesting point about hospice, because you're working so much up to that point. And I have an in-service coming up in January with a hospice group to talk about funerals,
Mhm.
because typically what happens with nurses, whether you're in the hospital or you're in hospice, there's a death and the nurse will ask, what funeral home do you want me to call? That's the question they ask. I've watched it hundreds of times. And it doesn't have to be the first thing. There's a program called the One Washcloth Project, which was started by ICU nurses. And what they started to do when there was a death was give the family a washcloth so
Oh.
they could wash their person,
Mhm.
right? That there was time for this in the hospital. There's no reason for there not to be.
Right.
And so there's this, they started this in Canada, it's spread to other places. And I have a little washcloth here tied up
Mm.
that they gave to me. It says, just bathe the body.
Mm.
Just bathe the body. And I keep it here to remind me of their good work. And and that's what we can do. So yes, I really, I want hospice staff to have a better repertoire in those moments after last breath, to um, encourage families to go slow now. It's not a rush. Hmm.
Sophie?
Yeah, I have some experience with this. My stepdaughters took care of their mom, and they've been taking care of her as she was dying. And then when she died, they kept her at home. They put her on dry ice, which is what they were aware of. And they had people come in, they had people singing, they had just, really beautiful. And they put her in a shroud and they covered her with calla lilies, like all over. And it was just really nice. And we would come and just sit on the bed and talk, and it was really pleasant. And this was 5 years ago, so it was when
Yeah.
things were just sort of happening. But
Yeah.
I think one of my stepdaughters had lived in California, and so there they were doing things like putting people on a fire, you know, and on a funeral pyre, and burning them, and anyway, so I've kind of gotten used to it, and it seems like
California?
in California, well,
Not so legally, it sounds like Carol and I are having
probably
the
probably
same
not,
train of thought.
probably
We did that
not.
in Colorado, but not in California.
There
right?
is an outdoor special
You know what?
place in
Maybe
Colorado.
maybe it was Colorado.
Yeah.
Is it? Where's Creststone? Is that
Creststone's in
Colorado?
Colorado. That's
That's
the
So
one.
it
Yeah.
was in Colorado.
Okay. Okay.
Anyway, so I'm just kind of getting used to this, and I think it's
Oh, wow.
just really interesting, and
It
green
is
burial too.
really, really interesting.
Yeah.
It is.
I
When,
think you have to get used to it.
A
Yeah.
little bit, and sort of let yourself think outside the box, and sort of what would I really want. I had a family recently that planned really well ahead. They knew the mother who was being cared for at home was going to die in the next 6 weeks or so. And the daughter went first to the funeral home. Um, their family included a Buddhist priest, so they were going to do all of these rituals at home before the body was taken for cremation. But it was very important to them that the body not be put in a box or covered up, um, as it was taken out of the house. And so this woman went, the daughter went and arranged all of this with the funeral director ahead of time, because she understood that she was asking for something that was a little unusual. And by going ahead of time and saying, I need this unusual thing to happen, is there any reason it can't? And there was no reason it couldn't. And she sent me a little video after that she asked me not to share with people, but of the shrouded body being carried out of the home very respectfully into the transportation vehicle, and it was transported directly to the crematory with the family following. And they had made this whole arrangement ahead of time so that they could witness the body um, going into the fire. So from their home, uh, accompanied by them into the fire. And it was really powerful for them. And it hadn't been hard to make the arrangements. It just took some forethought and some phone calls, and some time to really think through what they needed and what they wanted. It was lovely.
Possibly a willingness to call several funeral homes to ask, will you help
He
with
was
this
lucky
part?
the
Oh,
first
you
time.
won't.
Yes.
Thank you. I'll call somebody else.
Right. Right.
Can you talk briefly about shrouds and like, are they typically homemade?
Well, so um Carol will tell you, because one of the ways that Carol and I first started talking about all this was that I wanted to start a burial shroud company, which I have done. Shrouds can be homemade, they are not typically. So let's start with shrouding cultures like the Jewish and Muslim cultures, which both traditionally have shrouded burials. And in those traditions, a body is taken from the home, usually by a designated funeral director, to a funeral home that works with that religious community and has special accommodations in their facility for um, a committee from the congregation. There are people in the congregation trained to wash and shroud bodies in a very specific traditional way. In the Jewish tradition, this committee is called the Hevra Kadisha, and I didn't know about. I am a rabbi's granddaughter, and I didn't know about the Hevra Kadisha until I was 50. It's the people on these committees are they're volunteers, and they're not named. There's no list of them, because it is a kind of a secret blessing. You should not get praise for this service to the community, and traditionally. I'm not quite sure how that's handled in the Muslim community, but in both traditions, the shrouds have more than one piece and are tied and arranged in a very specific ritual way with knots and prayers, and it's done with immense reverence. I've seen both and have been really moved by it. What I teach when I'm teaching workshops about shrouding is you can use what's on the bed, especially if there's something king sized. And you can really easily fold and shroud someone in what's available. If you want something that's more elaborate, there are a whole bunch of things on the market that range from really fairly simple, like a one piece cloth, to something more, um, I want to say user friendly. The shrouds that I design are built into a carrier that makes it very easy to, with handles that make it very easy to move the body once it's shrouded. Um, so, you know, there's a range of things. They tie in different ways, and um, there it's not hard if you do a Google search to find patterns for shrouds online for free. There are a number of different companies like mine that sell them.
Mhm. Thank you.
Yeah.
And sometimes people have quilts and fabrics that have been in their family for generations that they want to use. So they commission an individualized
Like
piece.
me.
Mm.
I made
They're just stunning.
a set of matching shrouds for a couple who live further out in Western Mass than all of us, way up on a farm, and intend to be buried in the back 40 there. And they've done the paperwork with the town, and they have a spot designated. And their children know what they want, but they wanted to have burial shrouds ready. And we started talking about fabric. There's the basics of what I use for the shroud, but in one of my designs there's an overleaf, and we started talking about what that should be. And um, we couldn't find anything online that she really loved, but I said, go to your linen closet and tell me what's there. And she had an heirloom quilt that was made by her great grandmother. And
Mhm.
we met at the co-op in Northampton, and she handed me off the quilt. And then a few weeks later, we met there again, and I handed her the two shrouds that we made from the quilt. And but we had a textile historian come and talk to us about the quilt first, because it was obviously quite unusual, with a lot of unusual fabrics. And we discovered that the quilt was made around 1860, and the person who made it had obviously been a dressmaker, because the fabrics were so fancy,
Hmm,
and
cool.
scraps from her work. And so when we returned the shrouds to this lovely woman, it came with some information about her great grandmother's dress shop, which
Hmm,
was pretty cool. So that can happen too. Or you
mhm.
can send me somebody's shirts, and I'll turn them into a shroud with the arms that come and tie around like a hook. It's a good thing. But yeah, you can use what's on the bed.
Well,
Oh, it's 5:30.
our time is coming to an end, and I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you to everyone who came and participated, and especially to Dina and Carol, who have shared your depth of knowledge so generously
Thank you.
with us. We're all a lot wiser now.
I want to say to folks, if you are looking for local information about funeral home prices, about burial grounds, and how to contact them to find out information about green burial, and a lot of other things, please go to the the Funeral Consumers Alliance of Western Massachusetts. Their website is, Carol,
Funeral Consumers
dot
WMass.org.
org. Funeralconsumerswmass.org. And I'll try and put this in the chat now. Carol has amazingly over the years and generously shared a huge amount of information on that website, and everything that we've talked about here can be found there. Funeral or funerals?
Funeral Consumers.
Consumers, Western Mass.
W
Org.
Mass, wmass.org.
Got it. There it is.
And there's also Green Burials math.org.
Yeah. So
Thank you so much for this information.
absolutely happy to
Mhm.
give it to you, and happy to share. And contact me anytime if you have questions. I'm happy to answer them.
Thank
Thank
you
Thank
so
you.
much.
And
Thank you very
within-
much.
Bye. Thanks.
Within the next few days, we'll put a link to the recording for this as well as the one that we did last month on green burials, so that if you missed any parts of that, you'll be able to access it. Thank you again.
Perfect. Thank
you.
you.
Everybody be well and safe and healthy. Live
You
a long
too.
time. Nice to see you, Carly. I learned how to make crepes in your kitchen when Laura and I were little. I can't hear you because you're muted.
Yeah, she just told me. Were.
Just
Oh, yes.
been about 45 years since we've been in the same room together. So it was lovely.
True. That's
Really
true.
lovely. Thanks for coming.
Oh, yes. You saw Laura, didn't you?
Yeah,
Okay. Because she was up.
it was great.
Yeah. Thank you.
See
Take
ya.
care, Carly.
You take care too, Sue. Thank you. It was great.
Thank you.
Really great. Crepes, huh?
Crepes.
So can we stop the recording now?
Oh, yeah.
Just want to speak with you briefly.